Test. Yes, I wanted to, and Dennis wanted to bring Kevin Haney here, our new CFO, who started 2 weeks ago, right, or 3 weeks? This is week 3. Oh, man, time is flying. Kevin is dived right into our budgetary process that had begun before his arrival, but now the professional's here to kind of move it along a little faster. He's been getting to know, he's familiar with the city of Cape May, but with the city of Cape May operations. So it was very nice. He's already made some recommendations to council that look to improve the revenues within the city of Cape May. So that was excellent. I mean, fantastic. He increased our interest rate that we're receiving from Sturdy Savings Bank, but I'll let Kevin go into that a little more. So without further ado, Kevin Haney.
So Kevin, where are you
Let's
from?
introduce all of ourselves to Kevin, so we know who we are. Go ahead, Russ.
No, I was just sort of interested in Kevin's background a little bit, if you don't mind.
Introduce yourself first.
I'm Russ Dickhart. I'm the guy that asks a lot of questions that Dennis doesn't like.
Oh, Bill, well, I don't say a word. Nice.
I'm Dennis Crowley. I'm chair of the committee.
Martin Van Walsum, we've met a couple of times.
Yep.
Hi, Kevin. Steve Bodner. Nice to meet you.
Same to you. Thank you.
Okay, the floor is yours for an informal presentation or discussion. That's fine with us.
Yeah, I could go into.
No, just, if you don't mind, I apologize. I'm a vacant, as they call me, so I'm not sometimes here. But it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your background and where you're from. And
Yeah, no, that's fine. So initially, I am from Bridgewater, New Jersey, up north,
Yep.
Somerset County.
Yep.
my connection to Cape May, so my grandparents retired down here in the 90s. They had a little place right at the end of the parkway, that Crossings community, I think it is, the like adult. So we'd come down every summer, Christmases, things like that, to visit them. So a lot of fond memories. They passed away within the past 10 years, so to keep up the legacy, kind of, my parents bought a place in that tranquility.
Oh, yeah.
So spent a lot of time down here, and I'm kind of continuing the legacy, I guess, another generation down here, but full-time, so.
Congratulations.
exciting. Thank you. Thank you. In terms of prior work history, initially I was at PwC doing audit out of their New York Metro office. I also spent some time in Peapack, New Jersey as a financial analyst for a private equity-backed water filtration company, I guess is a good way to put it. But yeah, that's my background.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
He's too young to do anything else.
But his hair is noticeably grayer already.
Already?
Yeah,
That's true.
just got rid of it all, you know, keep it easy. But yeah, oh, also I'm a CPA, I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, and just for the background, there was, you had to get a certification, or you're working on a certification?
Yeah, working on, so it's the CMFO for all municipal finance officers. It's some courses at Rutgers. I'm starting them this April, and it's, I think, a 2-year, 1.5 to 2 year time frame to then obtain.
That's out of the DCA, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
good,
it's
good.
all online courses at Rutgers, so
Okay,
not too bad.
anything else? What are your first impressions?
So far, so good, I'd
Yeah.
say. Yeah, everyone I've met has been extremely helpful, you know, willing to lend a helping hand.
Tell us a
easy to
little bit
talk to.
about that interest rate thing that Lou was talking about.
Oh, yeah, so our funds over at Sturdy were sitting at around 1.3%.
Mind you, we are on the internet.
Yeah,
We are live.
yeah. So we just looked into a couple of potential options. NJARM, the New Jersey Asset and Rebate Management Program, it allows municipalities to invest funds, excess cash, into a fund comprised of government-backed securities, typically earning higher interest rates, just to allow them to make some more interest there. Also collaborated with Sturdy just to get us on a good path going forward in terms of where our cash is sitting.
That's good. You had some concerns in that area, didn't you?
Well, I understand that the municipalities' hands are tied a lot in terms of what they're allowed to do, but, I mean, there are even high-interest savings accounts now that are completely liquid that, I mean, I'm getting 4%, so it's great that you've been able to do that because it's money that the city can put to good use.
Exactly.
That is rightfully ours. I mean, those are the prevailing rates. So, good, congratulations.
Yeah.
Without saying what our current rate is, it is much more competitive and in line with what market rates are than it was when Kevin got here.
Well, it came up in MTRAC before, so we're happy that it's coming to fruition. That's great.
Yeah, that's been, I think that's been a good thing that's happened over the last couple of years. The city has placed a higher and higher priority on searching for these kinds of things. That's great, it really is. Shows we're moving in the right direction.
The money's deposited every day that we take in, like in the beach tags in the summer, it's a daily.
Yeah.
That's that daily turnover thing, right, that he, well,
I think they call it a sweep.
sweeps, yeah,
Yeah.
right.
When you're in the business, you
But
have to say the sweep.
But the NJ Arms accounts that Kevin was talking about, that he found and brought to us, was a very interesting thing that I had not been aware of. And they offer, it's specifically tailored for government agencies and has a much higher rate. It was created in 1989, I think.
89, yeah.
So that's something that we're going to continue to look at. You know, the conversation changed a little bit when we talked with Sturdy, but it's still on our radar, and we're still looking at that as an option for maybe some of our funds.
Oh, so you haven't moved any funds into,
Done it yet?
We didn't have to. Sturdy,
Not yet.
Sturdy said that,
Sturdy Savings
they made
Bank,
they made
everybody-
sense, what they were doing.
Yes.
Exactly. But this NJ Arm is good, you know,
They-
going forward.
Congratulations to Sturdy.
Yes.
They got the
Rather
message.
you lose a customer.
You probably haven't had a chance to familiarize yourself with what MTRAC does in any great degree. I know I sent you.
Not substantially, no.
Yeah. So our task has been for the last couple of years to find ways to secure new forms of revenue and also to examine operational aspects of the city's budget so that the revenue is appropriately spent and it goes to the right places for the right things. We've had a series of, I think, 10 or 12 recommendations that we've made over the last 2 years. And things have been mildly successful, I would think, in terms of what we've suggested. We also know that when we make a recommendation, it goes to another different level of decision-making, which is the political process, and that takes its time. So our job isn't to be political. Our job is to examine what's being spent, what revenues are being raised, and seeing if there's ways where we can tap into new sources so that ultimately we can keep property taxes as low as they've been. And I guess we've done a pretty good job because property taxes haven't been raised in 3 years. And I would guess that's attributable, at least in part, obviously, to what MTRAC's been doing, I would think. So it looks pretty good. There was an article in the paper, I think I sent that around to you guys a little while ago, that commended basically Cape May for holding the ratio of property taxes to other revenues as low as it is, the lowest in the county. So I think we're being,
You know, it
Probably one
has
of the
been
lower
for many, many years, too.
yeah, it's getting even lower. Yeah.
Dennis likes to say, and I know he's said it on the air before, that it's not our job to be liked. We have to do what is necessary to help the city. Obviously, we're sensitive to what the needs of the city residents and non-resident owners think and feel, but at the end of the day, we're never going to be like a consensus on anything in terms of what should be done for the city of Cape May. So it's up to the city government, the administration, to decide what's best. Our job is to just feed ideas, and then Lou and others can sift through them and decide what will work and what won't.
The only thing I'd add to that, though, in some offset to what you just said, Mark, is that we do try to take into account and try to bring in the constituents that are impacted. And I think that's an important role that we play as well, so we can understand all aspects and what the potential impacts are. And I do think that MTRAC and Dennis in particular has tried to do that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I guess that's,
Even though at the end of the day, we may not be liked, at least, but at least we try to do that.
well, we may not be liked, but we'll always be likable, which is
That's fair, yeah, I'll take that.
a little
We
different.
haven't gotten
I
any
would hope.
Some of you more than me, but, you know.
Okay, anybody, anything else that we have on the, for the good of the order? And just, it's a great introductory meeting for us, and we appreciate you stopping in, and we'll be working with you. If you want to attend the meetings, that's fine with us. We'd like to have you visit with us as we talk, because oftentimes we do tend to take things a little further than they're realistically possible, and we like reality checks as much as possible, I think. All right? Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You, guys.
You're getting off that easy? Holy mackerel, huh? You gotta be
We
kidding
were
me.
gonna
Oh.
ask about the budget, but
Oh,
we were gonna ask about the budget, but there's no public information yet about the budget. So it is coming up at the next council meeting. Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks again. Thanks again.
okay.
Okay, let's go to our first issue on the agenda, which is parking revenue, and you all have a copy of that discussion paper.
Yeah.
Without walking through it necessarily in particular, we've seen bits and pieces. This is a little bit of a different cut on it, but let me just throw it open and get some reaction to this. Anybody want to start?
My biggest reaction to being relatively new to being a city resident is I'm not quite sure. Everybody says we have a parking problem, but nobody can really put a finger in terms of what the problem is.
Good point.
When you talk with people, some people will say, well, I want a parking spot that is close to where I want to be, whether it be the beach or the mall, period, end of story. Other people will say that the parking problem is that we don't have enough parking for employees of the different establishments, and therefore they take all the prime parking spots, at least anything that's free.
And in reality, the city and we have been going around in circles for years about this parking issue. And it came up about 6 months ago when we recommended that the parking study group study parking alternatives so that we can provide some funding options for them. That didn't go very far. The parking committee didn't do too much more than recommend that some loading zone spaces on Jackson Street be provided. But
I'd like just to jump in there. First of all, it depends when you say there's not enough parking. In the daytime, you're probably right, when the beaches are loaded up from all the campgrounds and so forth. But in the evenings, we do have enough parking. If you were to go down to Philadelphia Avenue and Beach Drive, after that beach lets out, you could shoot a cannon down those parking spots. It's empty. And that's why they tried to get this jitney or shuttle or whatever you want to call it running so they could park there. The council did pass an ordinance to shut the meters off at 5 or 5:30, I forget. So it was free parking. The people could get on the shuttle, come into the mall and get dropped off, and the shuttle would run back and forth. That's the way it was originally planned. So there's plenty of parking in the evening. The education by the city of Cape May has fallen down because nobody knows about the meters being off down there. And last year, I'm not sure the jitney people knew. Well, if the people weren't parking down there, the jitney didn't have people to shuttle. So, but my thing was to put up a big sign, free parking after 5 or 5:30 from here down, and maybe paint the meters a different color, be blue or red or yellow, whatever, so that people would know, would say, park at the yellow meters, for instance. They're free. And shuttle will be picking you up every half hour to take you into the mall. The city, and to some degree, the parking committee fell down on the job. The parking committee tried to push it, but we weren't getting through. But in the daytime, there's a little bit of a problem, because all those spaces that I'm talking about in the evening that are empty, they're all full during the daytime. So, I mean, it's different segments of what you're talking about.
But parking for dinner around the mall is impossible.
it is, I agree with you.
I mean, so,
But I mean, if they had this, if they educated people right and put up a few signs,
yeah, no, I don't disagree. I don't think the MTRAC, I guess, Dennis, my reaction is that, are we making the assumption there's a parking problem and therefore we need to develop revenue sources to help solve it, or are we trying to become the parking committee?
no, we're not trying to, but it sounds like.
Because it sounded like we were trying to become the parking committee, and
I think the answer to that question would be, in my opinion, that we're not trying to be anything but a revenue-generating committee.
Right.
And that there's ample evidence that we have, everybody in this town thinks there's a parking problem.
and at times there is.
And if you look at that first sheet, the last 3 master plans, going back to the 1990s, have all said that this is a very serious problem, probably the most serious problem, and that if Cape May wants to turn its identity into a year-round community, year-round resort, then parking is going to be a year-round problem. That's what the master plan says.
I think affordable housing is probably more of a problem than parking, but yeah.
Well,
Well, the
affordable housing is a problem, if I could say this in all candor, it's a problem in the abstract. Because we should be doing way more than we're doing on affordable housing. but it's an abstract concept. The parking issue is not an abstract concept. It is a real thing. That everybody says there's not enough parking in Cape May. Now, I did these little charts here. Did you get
Dennis,
those?
I got one other thing to say.
Okay.
Originally, the parking meters, when they put them in many years ago, it wasn't for revenue, it was to make movement so that people would, shop for a couple hours and they had to move their vehicle or go to the beach for a couple. They couldn't leave it there all day. And it's when, like you said, the employees, if they park there all day, or the people on the beach park there all day, it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I think the problem, the dimension of the problem probably needs to be recalculated. Because the master plans have said, for the last 3 master plans, it's a problem. But they're relying on data which is probably 25 years old. There hasn't been an actual traffic study and parking impact analysis done in Cape May in a long, long time.
Well, Dennis, I'm not going to argue with you because you're probably right about that. But what I'm saying is I look at it like basically it's going to be the same idea, only it's like it's going to be a percentage higher each year because more people.
Yeah,
But the traffic patterns are going to be the same. The streets have not changed.
Unless we do things to change the traffic patterns. And that's where,
Yeah, we
Now
don't-
you
Hang on.
really get into
hear,
trouble.
hear me out. Joe Itzkowitz, who was appointed to the parking committee just prior to their being
I know
dissolved,
Joe, yeah.
okay? He does parking for Old Town Philadelphia. And he tried to bring some ideas to the committee for them to, first of all, do a study. But second of all, I had a dialogue with him separately. He said, if you try to fix the parking problem, you're going to create another problem, which is more cars on the streets. So what he said is what we really want to do is to have fewer cars on the island. And that will solve the parking problem and
Now, if you
contribute.
solve that problem, you go
Well,
to the head of the
So,
class.
so we don't know what the solution to that is, but there are potential solutions.
you know,
But the point here, I guess I'm trying to make is, and Mark, and Dennis, you've heard me say this before, I do think we have to stick to our knitting here. We're not the parking committee, and whatever the next,
So to bring it back to what we do,
How do
what
you-
Job wanted to do was do performance parking,
right,
all right? So that there are always spots available at the mall if you're willing to pay for them,
right,
okay?
right.
And that was a concept that was introduced by the person that started the jitney for us back in
Okay.
2019.
Good.
Okay, so those are the kinds of things, that has a revenue component to it that we can examine.
Now, that makes
Another alternative is put more meters out there, that raises more revenue too.
It makes sense, and it may work, but here's the other side of the coin. The people, the residents of Cape May, they don't want to drive up to the mall and have to pay $6 or $7 an hour to park.
Sure.
So guess what? They're the ones that elect the city council. You know what?
But they're also not going to park over by Peter Shields in the evening and take the jitney in. So what we have to look at is, are we providing this?
No, I've talked to residents that live down East Cape May, and they like the idea, the concept of taking the jitney uptown. They don't like.
There are some places, that only allow residents to park in certain times, in certain areas. And anybody that comes off island they have to park in off spaces.
So I have an addition to Dennis's chart with respect to the site plan.
Okay,
People have talked with me about, and I've observed myself, that we have a requirement that you have to have a certain number of spaces
right,
for your house.
right.
We don't have a requirement, you have to use them.
That's true.
So there are 100 cars or more that instead of being parked in the driveways of their homes are parked on the street.
Sure.
Because it's easier than playing Jenga with your cars.
Correct.
To just put them out in the street overnight, year-round.
Sure.
So if we could solve that problem, then we create more parking for the people that are, let's call it transient.
But now
So
we're getting
then-
back
so-
to being a parking committee.
Yeah, that's not,
No,
That's
because,
not what we wanna do.
because it could be a licensing thing. It could be that if you're going to park on the street, you have to pay for the right to do so.
Hey,
well, here's the
good
way,
luck.
here's the way
know.
I approach this issue. Hear me out for just a second.
okay,
I think before we can even address the funding of parking solutions, we have to define what the problem is. The parking problem, what is it? We don't have a clear understanding, I don't think, looking at the code and the ordinances, we don't have a clear understanding about what is provided in the ordinances with respect to off-street parking. I also don't think we've really done a careful job of quantifying the drivers of the parking problem, if you know what, the issues that drive the parking problem. This chart right here, which I sent around to you, is an attempt to sort of visualize what the issue might be with respect to funding a problem before we identify a problem. And if you look at this chart, what we really see, I think, is that there's a lot of different needs that are generating the parking problem. The beach, the businesses, the shopping, the restaurants, they all have a commercial identity, which brings cars to town. This big block in the middle of the chart is just the parking dilemma. Now, we haven't done a good enough job, I think, as a city to address that parking problem. If you look at some of those little blocks there, and they came out not too well, but we do have a requirement, as Martin was talking about, in the code, that everybody who has a business and everybody who has a residence has to have an off-street parking. If that off-street parking is there, that's the parking for
Well,
that.
if it's a new business or new construction, but a lot of those houses are grandfathered, you can't make them, they don't even have a driveway, for God's sake.
Right, and
How you gonna-
what the city addressed that problem. If you have an old house and you don't have a parking space anywhere on it, on the property, the city passed an ordinance years ago where you can buy a permit to park right in front of your house, and nobody else can park there. There is a,
I didn't know that.
yeah,
I think it was a one-time fee.
no, it's in
It's
the
a-
code.
I'm saying you paid one time.
You pay annually.
Okay.
Annually. And that's one of the
Really?
minor sources of revenue.
When was that passed?
A long time ago, actually about 10, 12 years ago.
I was gonna say, that's interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
So if you have an old house
If you have a house that doesn't have.
and it doesn't have a driveway,
Right.
you are supposed to do that by ordinance?
You can.
You can, or you're supposed
See,
to?
here's what happened, and it happened, the history of that came about because down in the old section of town, close to the beaches, people who had houses didn't have parking, off-street parking.
Right.
And they were always parking on the street, which is not a problem in February, it's a problem in July.
Right.
So they approached the city and requested that, in fact, I was on a committee that designed this 10, 15, 12 years ago at least. They approached the city for some way of assuring that they would be able to get a parking space in front of their own house. And the city came up with the ordinance that gave them the opportunity to buy a permit to park in front of their house. Hey, Alex?
What's up, Dennis? How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. You got these doors left open, or should I lock them?
Which
Well,
stores?
We lock, we secure
You,
city hall.
you can lock them, it's just so we can get out when we're done.
Can we,
To be able to get out.
It's a
Oh,
push-
yeah, that's all right.
I wasn't sure if it was like a public meeting or not.
Yeah, it is a public meeting, but, yeah.
I don't think anyone's showing up
Nobody
now.
showed up, it's a half hour late.
What time do you guys go till, you know?
Yep,
Depends on how long Dennis goes.
5:30.
he's wound up.
6 PM, I'll come back.
He's
No
wound
later than
up.
5:30, about an hour from now.
We'll have somebody lock it after this, but we don't,
All right.
you know, just for the I guess the public has the right to be here, right?
Yes, they
Yep,
do.
Yep,
I don't want to close.
Thank you.
thanks, Al. See you.
So they could purchase a parking permit
Yeah.
each
and,
year.
As a matter of fact, in that little
See, I was aware of it.
discussion sheet, I did identify that as one of the sources, the existing sources of revenue.
Do we know how many of those are being taken advantage of today?
You know, I knew about the handicap park.
I was going to say, I knew handicap, but I never heard it was the
It's
other.
called an
Yeah, you
off-street
see some,
annual
you see some
parking.
spots on some streets with signs just.
Resident park only.
Yeah,
It says
exactly.
resident only.
Yeah, yeah.
How much is it?
$350 a year.
Be interesting to know how many are actually being purchased.
I have that number to the budget.
How about that?
And so, anyway, going back to the point of the blocks, the city either requires you to have off-street parking, or gives you, if you're a resident, the opportunity to buy a space, rent a space for that in front of your house. If you don't want to rent a space, then you have to go and
Just take your chance.
take your chances and find your spot somewhere else.
Right.
And how does that enforced? I mean, does the
There's
the
a sign.
resident get a stick, well, not about the sign, but if somebody parks there,
They get a
And-
ticket.
they get a ticket and towed?
Yep.
But there's nothing to say that the resident that bought the permit has to use the spot if there's another available spot. So
Yeah,
we
they
have
could
quite a few of those in my neighborhood. And what you'll see is that if there's a spot available, they'll take that spot and leave the reserved spot open for if somebody else from their family or visiting
Yeah.
wants to use it.
If I was a kid, I'd sit out there on a crate and you can park here. My dad, mom, and
That's
dad
the way it
paid
used to
for
be
this
up in
spot.
Connie Mack Stadium.
They'll usually have a cone that they'll put out attached to a chain, and so that they'll put that cone in the spot so that people know they aren't supposed to park there. You have issues with people parking there anyway.
Yeah.
But the other thing that is that is available is you can buy the right to park across your own driveway.
Right.
Yeah,
I was aware of that.
Okay, and I think that was $100.
Yeah,
That I was aware of.
Yep.
I just hadn't heard about the other. Yeah, my grandmother we had a handicap one in front of her
that's
spot.
$25.
$25?
Yeah. You can park across your own driveway, you get a placard, and it's $25 a year. Now, the other thing we do as a city, and if you're looking at that little chart, the 4 blocks in the middle are the way the city addresses their parking problem.
Right,
We have public meters,
right.
and the public meters are not solving the parking problem. The public meters are generating general fund revenue. It's just a revenue stream. Doesn't go near the parking problem.
$1 million revenue
Yeah.
stream.
Oh, 2 million.
2 million?
Yeah.
So, used to be $1 million when I was
I
married.
know, it's big. Actually, I pulled the data on that just to,
Inflation,
Does that include the tickets that are written?
No.
no,
'Cause there are 4,000 tickets a month written during the summer months.
that's
Is it 4,000 a month, really? Wow. Wonder how many ever paid.
a lot.
most of them.
Most of
If they're not paid, they get a bench warrant.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about people from off island that come in.
From where?
Off island.
No,
Well, what's that? What makes,
they send the tickets to their house.
get a bench warrant?
Well, I understand, but if you're only coming, never mind. I don't want to talk about what I used to do as a youth, but go ahead.
And the other thing, the other way the city compensates for parking needs are free spaces all over town. Now, this chart, this red block at the bottom, is the rest of what we need for parking. Now, that's where the policy decisions have to come in, because we have to look at that red block, and we have to say, are there alternatives we're not doing to solve the parking problems? How much are they going to cost? And we have to change the behavior of everybody involved in this process in order to make that red block a reality. You with me?
Yes, recognizing though that if we make more parking available through whatever means, we bring more cars onto our streets, which adds to the
You're exactly
traffic
right.
problem.
The
Well-
more spaces, the more they're gonna keep coming.
Well,
It's like, need to maximize they've never maximized the shuttle lots, and as far as with the jitney, it either came together,
when we made the recommendation for
Yeah.
the committee work, the shuttle needs to be real, it needs to be effective, comprehensive, and it needs to be funded properly, but if you can't,
And people need to know about it. It
Publicized,
needs to, yeah, there needs to be,
They have to have an education about the shuttle. They've
Yeah.
never done it.
Well, it's
you
also-
talk about
it's also
behavior
you have to feel
modification,
more-
you don't get behavior modification if people don't
You
have
also
the
have to feel more
information.
confident about the schedule, I'll be
No,
honest with you.
that's
Yeah.
part
I
of
mean,
the
it really was part of the issue too, is
Yeah.
that some people,
And
you're sitting out there in the rain,
and this is as far as we got the last time we talked about this.
exactly. And that's when we said, we need the parking committee to be reconvened so
Yes.
they could really go after
That's
this.
correct.
And
Now,
now, where is that right now?
the parking committee is gone.
Is dissolved,
There's no parking.
and there's no plan for a replacement.
No. No.
Well, it's not a problem.
Oh, crap.
Dennis had said it in an earlier meeting that we should define the problem more precisely and work with city council and with the public to flesh out what is the parking problem.
You know, I'd really like that if a couple of the council people would come and sit down there and let them tell us what the problem is. 'Cause I don't think
One of your parking
they
committee,
don't know any better than we do.
one of your parking committee members said that the city doesn't really know the definition of what the parking problem really is. So until we know what the problem is, we can't start to create solutions.
Too many
Stacy
cars.
had some energy around
Now,
that.
what's that?
Stacy had some energy around that.
Yeah. Well, the,
Too many cars. That's-
we are, as a committee, we're not technically dead in the water.
I guess,
Because
but if the city doesn't think we have a parking problem, why does MTRAC need to attack this?
Yeah, well, the city, I think, I'm putting my words in somebody else's mouth.
Speak up so we can hear you.
No, I think the city,
Just kidding you.
oh, okay.
I'm kidding you.
I think this has been a problem for so long that everybody has decided to just live with it.
Okay.
Well,
I,
to some extent, I think you're right. But you know, we dogged and dogged and dogged them till they got those spots over there next to the by the
Train station.
railroad train
Yeah.
tracks, you know. And we did enlarge the lot down at the end of Bank Street. We got more spaces there, and I think we could get another 10 or 15 if they really crunched. But nobody goes over and measures the spots out.
Well, in preparation for our meeting, I went over to the stone section by the Welcome Center. It's completely haphazardly marked. There's meters here
I
and
agree
there.
with, it's
There's-
been that way for 25 years.
So there's 15 spots there. Another idea that I saw someone generate is, why do we have parallel parking along the beachfront? Why don't we have angled parking, which
Well,
creates
I'll
more
tell you the
spots?
truth, I think the state made us do that.
yeah,
Okay.
because of the width of some portions of Beach Drive.
So if we re-examine that
We used
issue,
to have it like that, and you could get more cars on
They
it.
looked at angled parking for New Jersey Avenue, and that failed miserably.
for New Jersey Avenue, yeah. But what about Beach Ave?
Don't know.
So that would, if we put, and by the way, it shouldn't be meters, it should all be kiosks. Meters are, they don't even make meters anymore. Cities buy them for spare parts.
Yeah, well, you know, the numbers are pretty clear.
Well, a lot of meters was given to us free, I thought.
If we were to be able to examine whether, or revisit the issue of angled parking along Beach Ave, that's more revenue.
That's not the MTRAC's position, job.
But the revenue component of it is,
If we want to say we want to drive more revenue through angled parking, that's separate from the parking issue. That's just driving more revenue. So if you're saying that, that's fine. I'm just saying, and Dennis has heard this, I don't think it's MTRAC's, job to try to be the solver of the parking problem. I mean, we are there to help generate revenue if we feel, as an example, which we talked about before, that we wanted to have a jitney service that was more regular, okay? That costs money.
sure.
But if it's more regular, people might be willing to go down, and park away from the city, because they know that they won't wait for more than 15 minutes for
And
a
a little
jitney.
shelter could be built.
And a
if it's
shelter, so if it's
raining.
raining or something. So if we, so how do we raise the funds in order to to provide those kinds of solutions for, now, I was thinking that this meeting, that's what we were talking about, that we were saying, look, even though the city has disbanded their parking committee, which is crazy, but even though they've done that, we think that if we came up with some revenue sources that would allow the city to enhance what they offer today, even that could be a good thing, and we could present that to the city, and then maybe the city would say, okay, we could pay for a more regular jitney service. We could pay for putting up shelters in certain key areas, maybe the lots off of Pittsburgh Avenue that the city owns, if we decide to do something with that, which was one of the things we talked about before.
Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, all of you, with the strike of a pen, raise all the meters 25%.
During the most
Peak seasons.
peak area, times, when you can't, so if,
That's all you gotta do if you wanna raise revenue, but this other stuff, I have to agree with you. They did away with the parking committee, so I don't think that's our task, but revenue, they wanted more revenue, increase the meters, and like you said, downtown,
Well, you're using meters in general.
well, general
Right.
terms, but I'm talking about.
Why not
kiosks
expanding
or
where the paid parking is? Why, it reduces the number of free spots, but it increases revenue to pay for other things.
What I'm trying to say is, if the council thinks that we have a problem revenue-wise, to help out the parking problem, just let us tell you, just raise the parking, come up with a plan. Maybe they want us to come up with a plan.
Well, you know,
Raise the meters.
there's
That's all there is
another,
to it.
there's another source of revenue.
I know, but
There's
sure
another,
there is.
and it's actually in the stuff I sent you. The parking problem, quote unquote, is generated by the reality that we're a commercial enterprise.
Right.
And that every site plan of every business and residence is required by our code to provide off-street parking. The city has never assessed whether or not that's even being done.
Well, that's what we gotta tell them, I guess.
Yeah, well, if we wanted to approach the problem from that direction, then you would need to go back and examine the site plans that were approved for every mercantile license owner and residential property. And then we can find out exactly what number of parking spaces the code requires.
okay.
I mean, that's the only way, in a computational way, that's the only way I can think of to find out how many parking spaces we need. I know how many parking spaces we have to provide, because that comes from the overflow crowds every time there's a dinner hour, a beach time, shopping date. It comes from 3 or 4 different sources. But the code is the bottom line for everybody in town to know how many parking spaces they have to have. If they have them, then that's fine. But if they don't have them and they still conduct business, then that becomes the source of the impact. If a business is required to provide, and here's some examples. About a year ago, there was an applicant at the planning board that talked about building a motel down in the Cove. They had to have so many seats per license. They didn't have, I think they were over 60 spaces over what they had to have, and they weren't providing it. And they asked for a variance. And they didn't get a variance, but typically what happens is when a business does that, those 60 spaces become the responsibility of the city. Because if you're not gonna provide off-street parking, then where are those 60 spaces going to be located? They're going to be located in the city.
There's no room in the city.
Well, that's the problem. You know why there's no, and there's the problem. Because if there's no room to actually put the car somewhere, then that licensee is probably gonna have to be responsible, should be responsible to the city for helping us figure out how to handle that problem. What's happening is, and it just happened, again, well, it happens all the time, but it happened again last month. There was an applicant who had gotten approvals for a variance on required parking with 25 or 30 spots. That individual applicant got that approval 3 or 4 years ago, is now expanding the property, but not expanding the parking impact, but they're still
He
over.
shouldn't be allowed to expand the property if he don't have the parking in the plan.
Yeah, well, what happens is, what happens typically is, they get a variance.
And whose fault is that?
Well, that's,
It's the fault, council appoints people to these boards, and if the people on the boards aren't gonna carry out the wishes of the council, what are you gonna do? I
Well-
mean, I used to see it all the time, that
I know
any
you
board
did.
would approve something or disapprove something, and then they would go get an appeal and they would get it passed.
I think there's a
And it's
middle,
like- It's like,
there's a middle ground, though. If you have a site plan that's impacting your parking requirements, the way it works now is you get a variance and you don't have to meet those requirements. The middle ground is, you get a variance, you don't have to have them on site, but you have to compensate the city for that impact.
and that's what the parking fund was all about.
Right, exactly, you're right on point. The parking fund was supposed.
This is whole history, really, for me.
But the parking fund, as it is now, is so limited in its scope
I
that
hear
it
you.
doesn't solve any problem. The parking fund, as you guys know, is a fund for an applicant who is expanding or improving an existing old property. And they can't get on-street, off-street parking. So they get to make a contribution to the parking fund.
Right.
So the logic of the city is, when you can't meet your off-site parking requirements, help us out to meet them someplace else.
Or financial.
And see, and so there's the logic, there's the funding source. There's the funding source for everything you want to do
Right,
to fill in that block.
right.
If the city, I'm suggesting we ought to recommend to the city that the parking fund be modified to require every property owner who can't meet his off-site responsibilities for parking to compensate the fund so that we can do that.
So right now, I thought they don't have to do that.
No, they walk away.
Oh, really?
They get
Well,
a variance, and they walk away.
They get, just to get a variance. And who they get the variance from?
Planning board,
From the
zoning
planning
board.
Jesus.
You listened to me, didn't you?
Well, see, you see, if you took,
Politics 101.
Politics 101, huh? So you need to have somebody.
With all due respect, I do listen to the zoning board meetings. They are pretty tough on this issue now. I can't speak.
Now they are.
I can't speak
Now
for in the
that
past.
it's out
But
of
we can't
control.
fix the past, we can only fix the
Yeah,
future.
I hear you.
I do think that these requirements in here, the 1.5, the 2.5 spots, those were designed around the principle of people living in their homes,
the residential ones are, and that's
Correct.
state code.
not renting them out.
Yeah,
So if you have a 7-bedroom house, you're talking 10 cars.
well, see, there you go. If you're
No,
just,
that's another whole issue.
I was about to make
And
the
the
same
people
point.
that are renting the house don't care how much it costs.
That's a whole issue.
And when you take the residential property out of the residential concept and into the commercial, which they have to have a mercantile license.
Right.
So anybody who gets a mercantile license needs to be responsible for the impact on the parking.
So you're saying, make the business properties businesses and have them subject to contributions to the parking fund like any other business?
Correct,
They should.
yes.
And that makes sense to me.
That
And
makes
then,
sense to me, too.
see, what you do is, you tie the revenue sources to the cause of the problem.
Right.
And that would be an easy one, because the residents of the city would be very happy that some of these large rentals, where they bring in 5 and 6 cars, they'll be very happy, and they'll back up the city council to pass something like that.
Yeah,
That's not gonna be a problem.
And what you're really doing, what we're really suggesting here is take the logic of the parking trust fund and expand it to address the parking problem.
Well, you can, that's what it's for.
It isn't right now for,
Well-
because I'll tell you what it doesn't let you do, it doesn't let a new developer do that. It only lets an old house developer do that. So what I'm suggesting is, take the logic of that fund and expand it to solve, to
Well,
address.
you're probably right, because that's what was originally set up for, was the old
Yeah.
house. I understand that now. I was
Yeah.
thinking, no, wait, no, but you're right.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good idea, but it's so limited in its scope.
But the new
It's not
houses,
sol-
the new houses,
There's more parking for the new houses. There's a lot of- they're in the
that's
east end,
where,
they're-
that's where the planning board comes in, says you have to have a driveway to park 2 cars,
Yeah,
or whatever.
But a lot of the big VRBOs and Airbnbs
They're out
are,
of control.
well, but a lot of them, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of them are on the side of town actually where there is more parking available.
Possibly, but if you advertise a house that sleeps 25, how many cars are gonna be coming?
I don't dispute what you're saying, by the way. I agree with you,
Yeah.
your
And
proposal.
and the other thing too is, we need to tell the city, I think, because, again, what I'm saying in this proposal is, look at the ways that the problem's being created, and tag the revenue to solving those problems. Look at the way we calculate the parking requirements for restaurants, for example. They have to have 1 car for every table of 4. If you own a bar, if the bar is under a mercantile license, the bar still has to have only 1 car, one parking space for every 4 people. Now, what we don't say to that bar is, you don't have to have any parking spaces for the 200 people who are standing in the bar. Yet the state requires maximum capacity. And that's calculated by the square footage and not by the number of seats. And I went through the entire code book on this, and there's such a disparity of a lack of consistency about the way maximum capacities are calculated in the code, that it's too confusing to tie any funding source to. There's just, I mean, and if you look at every mercantile license operation in town, and look at where it's located, there's a parking requirement for that. A shop in the mall, if it's 200 square feet, it has to have 1 parking space. That's our code. And if the code,
How's it enforced?
it is not enforced.
That's the problem.
There is no enforcement. And it's almost like a blinkered approach to this thing, that we're whistling past the graveyard on this. Because our code is so clear that residents and businesses alike all have to have off-street parking. But nobody says, where's your off-street parking? And that's okay, as long as we say, well, if you don't have off-street parking, then you're gonna have to help us solve the problem that you're creating by not having off-street parking. It's not Cape May's, it's not Cape May's problem. We didn't cause this problem. What we've caused is businesses have created a commercial environment which is attracting cars by the thousands. And that's not a bad thing. The bad thing is we got no place to put them. And I'll tell you, and here's another thing, it's just an aside for me. I think that if we're a tourist community, we're a commercial enterprise. We need people to come here and enjoy this town. And if we annoy them to a point where they don't come, then we're working against ourselves. And I think raising parking meters as a quick fix to generate revenue
Alone.
alone is an annoying concept.
I agree alone, but I'm not sure that that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look at it.
We shouldn't look, well, no, we
For
shouldn't look at
particularly
it.
some of the
But-
the key
Well,
times.
But you
In
know,
other
there's
words,
some
you're
towns,
saying people are gonna stop coming to Cape May? I don't buy that, Dennis.
I don't either,
Sorry.
I don't either to the extent that they will not
It's-
come, but then,
It's happening already. There are people that get tired of driving around looking for a parking spot to go to the
Well,
beach, and they
I
go.
understand that, but you know what? Behind those people, there's 6 more people coming in.
okay,
I
but,
know this is off topic, but did we ever pursue the idea with Lower Township to look on the other side of the bridge?
no. We didn't do that.
Well, I know, did the parking committee?
No,
They never did.
They
but I did
asked,
Bring that up.
they asked, and Lower Township said, thank you, no.
Even
It's
though we
not
pay?
even Lower Township property.
Well,
But,
whose property is it?
but they,
It's the state of New Jersey.
what we
Are you
don't, well,
talking about the property as you come into town?
Yeah.
In that area next to the canal bridge?
I was referring
couple
to the
acres
Mitnick School. So
'Cause-
they asked the
I'm
park,
sorry, you were referring to where?
the Mitnick School?
yeah, it's over on.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so my understanding is the parking committee asked to be able to use that like they use the Cape May Elementary School in the summer months, and then run a jitney in.
Yeah, they
What I
do
don't
that.
know is, did they offer to pay them for the,
Because,
Right.
because to me,
To
if
answer
we
your,
had revenue sources, we would pay Lower Township for the use of that. And why couldn't we go to the state
but
for,
to answer your question on people coming, parking, 2021, parking meter revenue was $2.2 million. 2022, it was $2.1 million.
My grandson's out there writing tickets.
Well,
That's what
it's,
brought it up.
the parking meter revenue is less than it was, so I don't know that.
Well,
that
it's
people
just
are-
like the beach tags. If you have a bad month where you have 4 or 5 days of rainy weather, beach tags are down.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the same way with a lot of stuff. It's,
well, we're a revenue committee, and
so your idea for revenue?
my idea for revenue
Is to take,
is to calculate the number of required spaces under our code, and if they can't be provided off-site, then the city needs to be compensated by a contribution to the parking trust fund, which will be used to fund a reliable and comprehensive shuttle system.
and that would be for even grandfathered homes?
Everything.
how do we calculate this?
Here's how we do it.
Okay, that's what I want to hear.
We pull the site plans of every mercantile license holder and every resident, and we calculate the number of required parking spaces according to our code.
how do you ensure that the spots that are being provided are used, though? There has to be
Well,
some type of a license.
That's like chapter 2.
Okay.
Because if you're required to have 4 spots, and you're using 4 spots on the street, because you have guests who are gonna use your 4, I think that's beyond our purview, frankly. Because I think what we,
It's going to get complicated.
Who's gonna do the calculation?
what's that?
Who will do this calculation?
We're gonna have to have the city do it, we're gonna have to do it as a committee, or we're gonna have to find somebody to do it, because it's a labor-intensive process.
Yeah, I was
But
gonna
when
say.
Congress Hall, when you register your car as a guest of Congress Hall, they
Yeah.
give you a card, and you have to put the card in your dashboard.
Right.
Why couldn't we require that anyone that has a mercantile license needs to do the same thing?
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
yeah,
And then they have to, the owner of the business has to pay the city for the use of the street parking.
well, that could work on a place like a hotel.
A house with 7,
Yeah.
that sleeps 25.
I don't know that it would work on
When I
a,
stayed on a house on Jefferson before I bought here, we had to have a card in our dashboard.
to park on the street.
On Jefferson Street?
Now, it may have been the owner that
I
was
think it
doing
was
that,
the owner. I
but,
don't remember that.
so,
No, there's no ordinance that does that.
but we could do that.
That would be okay in a certain context, but what about the candy shop in the mall?
Yeah, the problem with the one spot that they're required to have, that's the employee.
How about the restaurant behind the amusement park on the promenade?
Well, that's another good example.
It's a perfect example.
It's a perfect example of what causes the problem.
Wait a minute, say that one again, the restaurant, what?
You
The
know where
steakhouse.
the arcade is
Yeah,
down there across
yeah.
from Henry's?
Yeah.
Well, there's a restaurant behind there now.
Okay.
And the site plan for that restaurant, which was, I think, 3 or 4 years
It's
ago,
a high-end restaurant, too.
that,
High for me.
they had a parking requirement under our code, section 525, I believe it is. They had a parking requirement that was completely waived. There was no off-street parking provided by that applicant.
Wow.
Now,
How's that happen?
The boards.
it happens all the time.
It's politics.
It happens all the time. And I guess my point is, that's okay, as long as there is an alternative to help us try and solve the problem you create by doing that.
So once you get this revenue, then how's that solving the problem?
The revenue becomes a dedicated fund to provide a regular, annual, comprehensive transit system for the city.
Well, then I'd be happy.
That's all that money's used for. And the parking meter money, I don't think it should go there, because the parking meter money is general fund
That's
revenue.
general fund revenue.
But if you don't have some way of bringing new money in, you're not gonna solve the problem, even if you think it's a real problem. So the only other way that this committee, I think, could be practically helpful is to say, there is new money there. The new money.
And then also could, you could add to that with a marketing campaign, a responsibility, you could have things in each hotel or motel or be, about the jitney service. I
Well,
mean,
you'd
you
have
could
to
do a
have an
lot more.
education,
Yeah,
There'd be much more education.
you gotta educate
to
the
make,
public.
education is
Critical.
is critical for implementation, but the mechanism itself, our recommendation probably ought to just stick to the fact that you as a merchant or a resident have got to provide off-street parking according to our code.
I don't know why we wouldn't do what Martin's talking about too, because I've been to a number of communities where you do have to put a placard in your windshield. That's just part of the
Makes
deal.
sense.
I don't know
Well,
why
you can
not.
do that. I mean, I'm not
For
saying don't do it.
enforcement,
What I meant to say was, that's chapter 2, that's enforcement.
But the revenue component of that is you have to pay for the,
You pay
Yeah,
for it.
sure.
right. So if you are required to have 3 spots in your driveway, and you have 4 cars, then you need 1 card. But if you're going to put all 4 cars out on the street, you're gonna need to buy 4 cards. And-
Yeah, and the other thing too, that generates a lot of the required parking spaces in our code is the employee requirements. There are employee requirements for off-street parking.
What are they?
They're 1 space for every employee on your largest shift. And,
Now that Icona's coming back to Cape May, I assume that'll be handled, right?
but,
Icona's coming back to Cape May, right?
That's what the
Now that
paper
Ocean,
said.
now that Ocean City's.
that's what he
rejected.
wants to do.
That's what the paper said.
That's another
It's
problem.
already got 2 spots, 2 places with more.
I'm 2 blocks from Congress Hall, and we have no meters,
You have what?
no meters. The streets are filled with employees from Congress Hall and from the mall.
Yeah, that is interesting. Why wouldn't there be meters there? That doesn't make any sense.
Because the people who, this happens every year. The people don't want the meters in front of their houses.
Well, I didn't like a meter in front of my house either.
The meters stop at South Lafayette and North Street, and then where I am, and is all free parking.
Yeah.
So that's where it starts.
We get the circulation all day long. You see the same car pass 3 times
Yeah.
on
Try to find
Congress
a
Street
spot.
trying to find a
And,
spot.
and by the way, that predicament, which is already unacceptable, would have been compounded beyond belief if those 60 cars that couldn't be accommodated by that motel came strolling through your neighborhood, it would be,
Yeah, it's a little far away from us, but everything impacts everything else.
oh, it's just, and so
You're
what you
sure
do.
that they're employees? I
Oh,
thought
yeah.
that they provided on-site parking for employees.
No, the on-site parking is used by the guests.
And even if
I just
the,
hired somebody from Congress Hall, I'm gonna have to ask her.
even if your on-site parking doesn't compensate, if you get a variance, you don't even have to do that. Think of it this way. Think of it as a spigot that gets turned on and just flows all over the street. And the owner of the spigot said, I don't have enough buckets. So you're gonna have to worry about it. You're gonna have to clean up the water. Because it's all over your streets. The parking trust fund was a limited attempt to solve that problem. It should be amended to broaden it. It should be, we should go back and we should assess every commercial and residential property who's required to provide off-street parking, an annual fee to help us solve the problem. Because the problem is real. There's too many cars, not enough spaces.
In the places where people want them.
Yeah, and that the master plan over the years has identified 3 options to solve the problem. The shuttle is one. More parking lots is another, which we can't do because there's no more land available.
Well, that's not true. I mean, down on Pittsburgh Avenue,
We
they
just
were
talked
good.
Well,
about Pittsburgh Avenue,
yeah,
city
but-
lot.
Huh?
Yeah, city lots on Pittsburgh Avenue. where you-
Pittsburgh Avenue lots would be great if you have the shuttle.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's the point.
But, and the other solution that was always been proposed since 1998 was a parking garage.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, parking, every year, every 10 years, the master plan comes out and it says the solution would be a parking garage, but nobody's gonna like it, so it's still a good idea, but let somebody else figure
You
it
know,
out.
Dennis, my belief is, and I was put in a position to, when I was mayor, to come up with a plan for a parking garage, which I did, then they almost hung me. But I really believe that you had a parking garage, you would fill it up, and they would keep coming, and there would still be a problem. You just, it's like having
Well,
a parking
yeah,
lot.
yeah, but there'd be less of a problem.
But that was
Well,
Job's,
that's what you're
that was
saying.
Job's
Well, I'm not
point, that if
sure
you
though.
create more parking, you're going to create more
Yeah.
cars.
So what was he suggesting was the solution?
Get them off island.
Go
And
go to the
also-
state- Go to the state of New Jersey, go to Lower Township.
Also premium performance parking, so that the people that are willing to pay $20 an hour aren't paying $10 an hour.
Well, see, I do think, that's why I do think that raising the fees in select hours
Yep.
is appropriate.
The third solution were to go to kiosks instead of meters, because you pay for whatever size vehicle you have. So a Ford F-150 double cab
Is that
pays
true
the
in
same
Philly?
as a golf cart.
That's true in Philly?
He says that, yes, so they don't mark the spots, you have to go to the kiosk and either pay or get the ticket.
Yeah, I know
So-
the kiosk, I didn't realize that there was
Well,
a
you know,
difference.
the other thing, you know, there's always 2 sides to every story, but the kiosks are good when they're working. But when they're down, you're losing a lot of money on a summer day.
I would think the kiosks are more reliable than the meters.
No, no,
Meters
the
are a lot older and mechanical. But, you know, if that's the case, then maybe we need to take the parking fund
Well, I
revenue
mean,
and
you
buy
know,
better kiosks.
They have a meter guy that, say you park at a meter and then you come back and you say, oh, I shouldn't have gotten that ticket, that meter's not working. Well, if you make a complaint, he comes out and he grabs the guts of that meter and puts in a guts of the meter that's working. He takes it over to the shop, he puts it on a clock, turns it. If it's out of order, then he puts on the slip, sends it to the judge, they'll dismiss the ticket. If it's working, he has to pay the fine.
Plus court
So,
costs.
but I don't think he's that busy, to be honest with you, but maybe he is. But, you know, things change, but the meters are more reliable than I think you think they are.
It's just that everybody's going to the kiosk.
Yeah, I
Everybody's going the other
understand
way,
that.
and because
But the
it's-
other thing is, they wanted to put one on Jackson Street, and they wanted to use solar Well, the shade of the trees, you know, the sun can't get to it to operate it. I mean, they come up with these, wait a minute, you can't use solar in that Jackson tree. I mean, I was there. What are you trying to do? You gotta run electric, you know, it's just a problem.
Thinking parking meters are gonna solve your problem is rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's not core to the cause of the problem.
No,
It's just,
But it does,
But it
you
helps.
can't have a disincentive for people to park in the central district.
well, you know
If,
what
if,
some
if it's,
towns
if
do?
it, if
You
it
know,
gets very expensive to the point that, you know, that we just made, is that
You-
if they know it's that expensive, they might be more incented to use a shuttle a little further away.
If there's a,
Especially if they know about it before they get into town.
Exactly.
You know, that's what you want to
the
do, is you want to keep the flow from coming in, because once they're here, right? They're just gonna circle until they find
and if
something at
there's a
some
place to
point.
go, a place to park.
And
But
you
if
think
there's a
about
big
it,
sign
if they
coming,
come
not
in,
that I
if they
want-
come in, if we do have a spot when they come into town, you know, a certain percentage peel off. It's more convenient for them. They do it once, and then it becomes their new muscle memory, right? They decide it's easy, I didn't have to go searching around, and it flattens out all of the, you know,
The
cars that-
trainable percentage of the population, the easily trainable percentage, are the employees. You only have to tell them once where to park. Whereas if you're a one-day resident coming in from a campground from Quebec, okay, you've got to teach them every single time where to go to park. The
Yeah,
employees,
yeah.
they park every single day.
True, but we have a lot of people that do, you have people that are repeats that come to Cape May all the time, right? So, look, they see it once, you get the lesson of, hey, I could have parked, there's great signage, now I know about it, I spent a half hour trying to find a spot, how frustrating was it while my kids were in the back saying, when am I gonna park, when can I get out, when can I get my ice cream? And, you know, now I know that this is there, it's convenient, if it's reliable, and it has to be reliable, and it has to be.
Right.
It has to be predictable. People have to know, I can get this every 15 minutes. There's-
Available and predictable.
Yeah,
And safe.
yeah.
And safe.
Yeah, but I think that, and that safety comes, what comes into play there. It's well-lit, there's people that are there, it looks, look, we all know when it
Well,
feels
I
safe.
spoke with an employee in Congress Hall and said, well, would you, because all the employees come from off-island. So if you had to park off-island, would you take a shuttle back to your car? And he said, not at 1 o'clock in the morning.
No.
I said, well, what if it were a golf cart? He said, yes, I would.
Why a golf cart? Interesting.
It's on demand, so it comes, picks him up at the door.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Now,
not part
I'm
of the
talking
shop.
about in the wee hours,
You're talking about the 1 o'clock in the morning people,
Yeah.
where there's plenty of parking at 1 in the morning usually,
but not when they got on their shift at 4 o'clock.
not when they got on shift at 4.
Yeah, they had a park. And
That is a good point. That is a good point. That's why I still say, why wouldn't we find out whether the state why wouldn't the state want
I don't know.
to have parking at the end of a Garden State Parkway?
Somebody needs to answer those questions, and that was what
I mean, why
Parking
not?
Committee's task was supposed to be.
And then for Lower Township, did we offer them money? I mean, because
I don't know the
if it's a revenue source for them, why wouldn't they?
There
Why would they
are-
care?
There's so much real estate available in West Cape May.
Yeah.
Well, we had talked, this is back when I was on the parking committee, the other hat.
Yeah.
You know, as you go out Elmira Street, the dump on each side there.
Yeah.
There's land there.
Of course there is, and it's dry.
Well, the one side is, I know, because, well, I'm not
Across the
gonna get
street from
into
the antique
history.
shop is,
Huh?
that's.
You gotta
dry.
walk up a mountain if you get back in that brush. I don't want to get into history of how it got there.
There's another way to encourage off-site parking, and some cities do this. They prohibit parking in their core area,
All parking.
all parking.
Okay, I haven't seen that. What I've seen is that, like Nantucket, they have, only resident, there's only people with a so-called resident license or whatever else that can park.
Yeah.
If you're an out-of-towner, you bring a boat over, you bring your car over on the boat,
Yeah.
you gotta go to the
Same with
designated
Mackinac Island,
places.
doesn't even let
You know,
cars,
you
right?
gotta go to designated places.
Williamsburg doesn't
Williamsburg
I
has,
think
In
Williamsburg,
the
same.
historic area.
Yeah, they have an area where only certain
yeah.
individuals could do
Well,
that.
That's the way to do it, then you remove the option of parking downtown by saying you can't park downtown. I'm not suggesting.
What do restaurants do? What do restaurants do with their reservations, with guests? They'd have to be able to have valet parking.
Down here in Cape May?
Yeah, the restaurants that are on the mall, what do they do?
They, I know one does, because it's behind me, the Washington Inn does that. They have valet parking.
They'd have to have
They
valet
rent-
parking.
They rent the funeral parlor,
Funeral home, yeah.
which is a great option. But, you know, they do
Then it-
park on the streets.
And that dentist likes it just fine.
Yeah, I know.
We do have the advantage that a lot of our restaurant clientele walk to the.
Well, that is true, but, you know, people do come from out of town to come into Cape May. So you have to have you have to have a solution that's not totally
But if you're going
inconvenient.
to Peter Shields, well, there should be parking down there.
Well,
If you're
Peter
going-
Shields is
If
different.
you're going to Primal, you're going to be willing to pay $20 for a parking spot during dinner,
Because you're willing to pay $150 for your
for a
dinner.
steak, yep.
Yeah. For Primal, I agree.
And
There are some other, there's something between Primal and,
The principle of performance parking is there is always a spot available.
yes.
And the price goes up and down on the basis of how many spots are available.
Well, how's that possible, though?
The Park Mobiles create data. And so the data gets managed, and when parking is tight, the fees are raised at the kiosk.
But how does that make a parking space always available?
People won't pay, some people won't pay $20 for an hour for parking.
Will they know that before they pull in the spot?
I don't know the answer to that. That's, you know, that's the premise is how I understand it, is the data controls the rate of parking. And I
Yes.
don't know how that exactly works.
It's the way that
That's the
Uber,
theory.
it's the way that Uber worked for New Year's Eve.
Okay,
Same kind of theory, you
Okay.
know, you know, at some point, there's a breaking point.
so you're saying that there is, when you're entering the Park Mobile app, it's telling you how much the parking is
That's
going to
right.
be? Okay.
It tells you at the time.
Well,
So-
here's where we are with this proposal. We have an option to fund new money to solve the problem.
To help others solve the problem.
To help other, the problem is, let's put it this way, the solution is probably, almost by default, a better way to run a shuttle system.
An improved, reliable, safe shuttle
We have a
system.
way to fund that. The way to fund it is to go back to our ordinances requiring mandatory off-street parking and create an assessment for any property owner, business or residential, that can't meet that.
Do you think it would be, if we started out, maybe just with the people that have mercantile license or businesses?
Yeah, I mean, we could do it, but I
You
think,
know, instead of, I think we get a little blowback from some of the residents that saying, hey, I pay my taxes, now you're gonna make me pay for.
well, see,
But if it's a business,
the
it's a little
code-
different, because they have a chance to add it to
pass
the
it on.
customer.
But
pass
it
on to
becomes
the
user
customer.
fee like everything. else.
Those same business owners are still complaining about the fact the mercantile license fees were raised by $200.
Right.
Even though they're charging $10,000 a week.
Right.
So that's, now we're getting back into the,
Yeah,
not our
but-
job to be popular,
Yeah.
right? What I think, Dennis, what you're saying is that we're going to council and we're saying we have to reopen the city's policy on how our streets, the street parking is divvied up amongst all the different
Yeah.
bodies that use it.
I mean, I have to say three things. Number one, the parking load is driven by the owners of mercantile license operations. Number two, the current parking trust fund should be modified and expanded to create a reservoir of money that can really solve a problem. It's not doing that now. And number three, we need to say that if you have a mercantile license, if you have a property in which you provide off-street parking, I don't think you need to pay anything, because you're not contributing to the problem. And probably in number four, that we have on our books right now a parking assessment of $25 for every mercantile license. That money gets jumped into the trust fund too.
Where is that going today?
It goes into the trust fund.
It does, okay.
But the issue we need to, I think, raise at that
We
point
just
is
raise
that
that.
$25
Raise
is,
that to $50.
it's A, not enough, and it should not be calculated just on the possession of a license. It should be calculated on how many parking spaces you're forcing onto our streets.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Now, that part I agree with.
That's a different size,
Yeah.
small business or big
Exactly.
business.
So if you,
I guess the only other thing I'd add,
and the other thing we need to do before we do any of that is, we need to go back to the code, take the requirements of the code, and assess every single property that's generating this problem. And that means we have to look at the site plans, or we can have a survey among mercantile license owners, but ask a question. By your site plan, how many parking spaces are you required to have?
Dennis, before, that's gonna be a monumental job. Before we get to that point, do you think we should call the mayor or the city manager and have them sit there and see if they wanna stomach this thing? 'Cause
That's a good idea.
yeah, because to do all that work, and I mean, I'm visualizing this is a lot of work. I don't know who's gonna do it. But see if they, I mean, come up with a rough plan.
Yeah,
And say,
and
this is
by the
a
way-
rough plan. What do you guys think? Because they're the ones that are gonna get blowback.
absolutely, and
What do you think?
I agree with that, and I think it makes sense to, that's why it was really great to have, one of the city council members on this committee.
Yeah.
So you'd have somebody that could test the temperature of the water, if you will.
Right.
Before we got crazy
Well,
and did a lot of this kind of
So
work.
the way to bite that apple in manageable bites, right, is you put, where do we want to be in 5 years?
Well, that's another way.
Where do
to
we
say it.
have to be in 3 years? Where must we be in 1 year? And that's how you go about it, so you don't have to do it
But
all
we
at
could
once.
come off like this is a rough draft of where we think.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's an
you
option.
guys should go. Now, what do you guys think about it? You get some feedback.
It's an
coming in.
option to fund an unmet need.
I just wish,
And if you, the question we could pose to the council and anybody else who wants to hear this is, this is the only way to solve this problem, if you think it's a problem, is doing something we haven't done before and finding a way to fund it that's not taking away from somebody else.
Well, it's a plan.
Yeah,
it's a plan.
that's all.
The only thing I'd say, Dennis, I'm not sure I would totally throw the baby out with the bathwater as it relates to looking at the peak times for, parking in the city,
Well, yeah, you're
in
talking
other
Now,
words,
about
you need a
something
park,
different.
see, you need a parking study and, that
It's
may be-
different, but it's another way to help raise some, you wouldn't solve the entire problem with it.
It's not just the peak time issue, it's maximizing the use of space within the city that currently exists.
Yeah, well, you're
That's
both right,
fine.
because
Yeah, but either way,
it's,
it-
you're
it-
maximizing space and the
But we
reality
don't
that
care.
there's
We're
different peak
after
times.
revenue, aren't we?
Well, maximizing the revenue that's being
it's
created by
it's
that.
maximizing revenue, and that's just,
So that's where the Pittsburgh
it's a-
Avenue thing comes in, that's where the.
Exactly.
That's where the stone lot by the Welcome Center comes in.
That's-
where the performance parking comes in, it all fits underneath that.
It all fits
There
within the
is-
same umbrella.
There is revenue that's being left on the table, we just have to get organized about
Well,
it.
I think, I could be totally wrong on this, but I think before, when they raised the prices of the parking meters, instead of like bumping it up a little, it was like boom. And the people go, wait a minute, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
It's like,
But it caused a response. So, again, in talking with the employees of Congress Hall, they used to park down closer to Congress Hall and use the metered spots. When the rates got raised, they parked further away.
well, they were making good tips, so if it cost them $6 or $7 in meters or whatever, they didn't give a damn. But then when it started, well, wait a minute,
Right.
I gotta weigh this thing out.
Right.
I'm
Now,
gonna walk
now
another
it's,
block or
now it's
two.
$60, right? Right.
Yeah.
So what do we need to do to convince them to park off island? That's a great question.
or at least in some of these other areas that are
Well,
accessible.
I have an idea. that if we can find a spot that will accept the employees' cars.
Yep.
That those restaurants and hotels that hire these 30 and 40 people on a shift, if they pay for like a shuttle bus or partially to have it run, you know, in other words, let them pay. They're the ones who are creating the problem, really, according to you, with the Congress halls.
Well, now you're into an area that's a possible solution too, in the concept of public-private partnerships. I mean, you could suggest,
Listen, let them do the whole damn thing. Why should we pay for that?
Well, because-
We can give them find a lot where they can, you know.
well, that's what our
out of town.
contribution.
Our contribution would be the lot, and,
Yeah.
and we want those restaurants to thrive.
I'm saying
Right.
that, but certainly, but if we can take the help and say, you park over here, and we got a shuttle that's gonna run, well, if the shift starts at 4 o'clock, you park at 3:30 and we come, bring you in, at whatever time, and then after the shift, we can have different times. But, I think you get them out of town is a really,
Well,
I mean, we talked about,
Well, they're
you know,
already-
Les Ray's farm out there, he's got, you
They're-
go down, didn't we
Ray's
talk
farm
about
out
that?
there.
we did.
They're already coming in from out of town. The question is, do they need to drive all the
But
way
what
into
we're
town?
talking about in
It's a
relation
parking
to that,
ride.
we're talking about the employees,
Right.
which is a big problem.
What I'm saying is, those employees don't live in Cape May. They go
Most
back
of
to the affordable housing thing. So they're coming onto the island every single day
With a car,
with their car,
and they can
by
park out
themselves,
at Ray's Farm, and we'll have a
if we can
bus
provide
that'll bus
safe
them in.
and reliable
That's the-
transportation.
It gets back to that again.
Okay, now we're into the realm of the parking committee's responsibility.
Exactly. But it's,
But
but
hold it, but hold
It
it.
wasn't our fault.
That being said, there's a way to.
believe
It's not
they're
a
not
problem.
replacing it. How can you not replace it?
This proposal is something that you might want to suggest to the city council, to approach the Chamber of Commerce for a public-private partnership, because it's their problem. It's their employees that are not getting parking spaces or taking parking spaces that we want to have for visitors. And not, so, I don't know, maybe.
Dennis, I don't know either, however you want to try it, we try it, talk to them.
At a time where it's very difficult to get employees, so we can't make it burdensome on the employees either. That's
Yeah.
Well, here's the bottom line, I guess, from what I'm talking about here, is actually a pretty simple one. If you think we have a problem, you need new money to fix it, here's some new money.
Let's get a little more specific than that. Here's new money to run a transit authority, or whatever you want to call it.
Tie it in.
That's what our
Yeah.
task was really for. is to-
Exactly. All right, well,
Well, tighten up the rules around the parking fund, and then the parking
Well,
fund has certain
Now, I think
specific.
you're going to get into more of a, well, you have to do some of that, I guess.
you gotta change the parking fund statute, because,
no, you're right.
because in its present form, it's not
Self-sustaining.
helpful. It
Let
doesn't
me,
do
let me
anything.
ask a question. Who is responsible today for the shuttle?
City council,
City
I'm sorry,
manager.
city manager, rather, yeah.
Well,
City manager
Yeah.
by himself?
Yeah.
Doesn't have anybody on his team?
Lou takes care of it.
They hire it out, it's they work a contract.
Well, I understand they hired out, but he has no one on his team that's really focused on it. He's the
So
one.
the park committee was drawing up, they were in the process of drawing up the routes that they wanted to
Right.
follow.
Right.
One of the issues that I saw with that solution is that they didn't have any data. So they had these interlocking loops that didn't interlock, meaning you could be standing on the green line and two blue buses go by before the next green one
Oh, my
does.
God.
Well,
And they were going to spend more money to do it
It's
because
like the damn
we were,
subway in London. You
we're gonna have
different colors. Right.
the same kind of shuttle service we had this year as we had last year. It's gonna be
There's no change
it's not, well,
contemplated.
it's gonna be a last minute deal, slap together a contract and see what we can do. It's gonna be just like it was last year.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's because that's the problem we as a committee had tried to avoid a year ago when we brought this issue
Yeah,
up.
exactly.
And so, Okay, we're not gonna, I think we should, as a committee, should no longer expect a parking committee to come up with a comprehensive solution. I think we should create a funding source, show it to the council, and tell them if they wanna do it the right way, here's how you fund it.
Here's how you fund it, and,
Well,
and,
the
and
other-
they need someone besides Lou, I
Well,
think.
this is just what I was
to-
gonna say. They gotta hire somebody to ramrod this thing and manage it.
I mean,
Yeah, well, that's,
But who's gonna do that? I mean,
What-
Mike's,
Did we look to see how the other, who runs those systems in other communities up the
they
coast?
all kinda do it the same way. There's no city, there's, shuttle services that are contracted out of, there's only, I think, one company that runs these things.
Yeah,
And they make a deal with a town, they run it like Seattle does.
yeah, CL has one.
Yeah.
That's why I wondered if
Yeah.
we checked.
They hire a contractor and he sets, and now Seattle's good because it's only one road.
Well, I understand.
But you
Well,
know-
two, but yes.
You
you
go
know-
up Landis and you go back Landis.
I was in Charleston 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And the hotel that I stayed in had no on-site parking.
Right.
They said that
Really?
there's a lot 2 blocks away, it's $20 a day,
Yeah.
or valet is $30 a day.
Yeah.
So I spent the $30 a day to valet my car and stood there for 20 minutes waiting for it to come to me when when we wanted to go to.
That's why when I go to Charleston, I stay in an area where I can walk to almost everything.
Yep.
Or take a horse and buggy.
It was February, so there's plenty of parking all over the place. I still had to wait 20 minutes to get my car.
you know,
Hey, could I ask you a question, Dennis?
Yes.
Before we disband this thing?
Well, there's one more issue I want to
I
throw
got
in.
one
there.
suggestion too.
Okay, so the mercantile fees, where does that stand?
The mercantile fees, we presented that to the council.
Right.
Maureen told me today that she discussed that as our representative with Zach
Yep.
and with some other folks on council.
Yep.
They are not going to do anything this year. And
No increases at all?
no. And they are going to, see, here's the problem, not the problem, but here's the reality. When we passed the ordinance on fees a year ago at our request,
Yeah.
we asked that every year before the budget was put together, somebody do an analysis of fees, and that, you remember that whole thing?
sure.
Yeah. They never did that, so we did it, and that's what we came up, that's why we came up with our recommendation.
Right.
She is committed to, and Zach is committed to the city doing that next year and making the recommendation based on our,
For 2024?
for 2024. Because we did say that if you change those two things this year, that everybody else should be changed the following year. And then going forward, every
Should
other
be
year.
There
you
should be a
change.
CPI,
Yeah, right, so they're gonna do that.
so 2024. They
gonna do it-
They just felt it was too much to push.
To pull out two
to pull
things,
out
do
this-
them, and then.
Gotcha.
That was their thinking on that.
Dennis, just one little suggestion, that, you know, as far as managing the transit system, whatever you want to call it, the jitneys, do you think it would be appropriate and wise for the city to advertise to see if there's a retired person in Cape May area that would take that job on from maybe spring to after the summer's over, to, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and I think.
Because I think there's not enough help to carry all this stuff.
I agree with
out. You know, who's gonna do it? And you wouldn't have to probably pay them a lot, you know. I don't know, that's just a suggestion, because I don't think there's anybody on board right now that's gonna be, they're all, you know, they're all getting ready for summer and they're busy as
Yeah,
hell.
well.
There's nobody left in the, you know, there's nobody behind us, who's gonna do it?
My understanding was from the jitney that is in place today, when it was put in 2019, the jitney owners did all the planning and the publicity.
Well, that's all right, I guess, if it works, but
And then, because
I
the
have some
jitney,
reservations
we did
about it.
away with the jitney during the COVID years,
yeah.
was then never put back in place.
I just think the city should have their man,
Well, that's,
you know, they can have their guy, but He should be answering to our man.
That speaks to the larger issue, Bob, the one we talked about all
Yeah,
the
I
time.
know,
And that is that, how's the city organized itself? And I don't think we want to get into that.
Yeah, we don't want to get into
No,
that.
don't get into that.
Doesn't make any sense. But, was there something else you wanted
Yeah,
to?
I did want to show.
What was that?
I want to show you, I'll give you this. We talked about this a little while ago, actually a couple meetings ago, and this is going to be one of our main focuses in the coming year anyway.
Oh, the shared services, yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
what I tried to do is get this on the one page so that we have a roadmap on how we want to approach this. And we did talk about what needs to be done in order to analyze the shared service issue, and that is to create that program-based fiscal impact study. I mean, this should be the first time they use it. They should design it and then use it. We could help them do that.
The dates on each of those, West Cape May, I mean, we should have the dates when these all
Well,
expire.
the only two contractual ones that are locked in, it's 2025 is,
It's on, all the contractuals are 2025.
yeah, right,
Everything else is not.
everything else. And these are these are the shared services, either formal or informal, that we involve ourselves.
So Lower Township, we don't have any contractual arrangement with them?
No.
I didn't realize that.
For what? What do we have with Lower Township?
Well, we basically, because of the canal, and because of the fact that Lower Township actually goes all the way to the ocean, next to Cove Beach, we are called upon to provide
Police?
police services and fire
fire,
services to that area.
To
Plus-
that portion of Lower Township.
Yeah,
Is there a written contract?
no,
with
it's
No,
a,
it's just a vo-
it's a handshake thing.
But my point is, well, here's my point. We just talked about parking in Lower Township.
that? They don't want to help us, do they?
Excuse me?
Well, I think they tried that.
I mean, no, but my point here is that, look, you know, we're trying to help you with police
I
and
hear you.
fire.
I hear you. I know what you're saying.
I expect the objections were about insurance, liability, things like that.
Yeah,
So
well, our objection
You have
with
to
police and
compensate
fire-
them
Yeah, no, but maybe there's a little,
Sure.
I mean, come on.
How about Wildwood Crest? What? I don't follow this in Wildwood.
I have no idea what Wildwood's about.
I mean,
We have-
every
What
one
is
of
that?
these things has a mutual aid agreement.
Yes, exactly.
Place, so what?
So for example, when
Well,
we had,
yeah.
when the H2OI issue came up this year in Wildwood, we were responding to the.
But
to
we
the-
have an agreement for that. That's called a mutual aid agreement.
Yeah,
That's a county-wide thing,
I understand that.
police and fire.
Mainly police and fire, the mutual aid agreements are essentially handshake agreements.
No.
And, well,
Not for police and fire, they're not.
There's a contract, what is it? What,
It's an agreement.
there's an actual agreement.
it's a resolution.
Is it renewed?
Yeah, so,
Is it
look,
renewed?
if our firemen go into Wildwood,
Yep,
for instance, and they get hurt at a fire,
right.
there's an agreement that Wildwood will somehow
The charge
pay
for it.
back.
Yeah, and it's,
It's a regular
and
agreement.
it's effectuated by a resolution passed by both councils.
Is it done every year? Is it renewed
Yeah,
every year?
It's
And
renewed every
I
year.
think, I've
But-
lost track of a lot of that stuff. I think the police, the prosecutor's office had it done for all the cops. It may be even, I don't know about New Jersey.
So
law.
that's what you're talking about when you say
Well, you're
police,
talking
fire,
about
and
that-
EMT is
you're
a
talking
mutual
about
aid
that-
agreement.
Yeah.
Okay,
You're
well, I
talking
get
about that to a certain degree, but because we're a revenue committee, what we're really talking about here is this community has a paid full-time fire department,
Right.
which we use to meet our obligations under agreements with other communities who don't have paid fire companies. So basically, under these agreements, there's an expenditure being made, a use of our municipal services for the benefit of another community. If that's okay with everybody, then fine. But if that means we need to pursue some sense of reimbursing our costs to provide services to communities that have no costs,
Like who?
like Lower Township,
Okay, so if they don't have services, there's a great way for them to reimburse us.
that's my point.
Make some parking available.
Well, that's a creative way to do it.
I'm sorry, but I have to come back.
It's actually a creative way to do it.
Why not?
Russ, I don't disagree with you. I think that's pretty clever.
I mean, I mean, come on, I mean, it just seems like you know, it reminds me of the bartering system going back,
But it's
right? I
just-
mean, to a
but
certain
see, it's
extent.
just like any other issue that we talk about here. I think we first have to calculate what the cost of something is.
Sure,
Before we decide who's gonna pay for it.
that's a fair point.
Well, Dennis, I know what you're talking about, and I've been, not vocal, but I've talked to other people about this. When Lower Township needs an ambulance,
Right.
Cape May Fire sends their ambulance. Now, that's fine, because somebody's in trouble, they having a heart
Yeah.
attack, whatever it is, no problem.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. When our two guys go over there, they put out a message. Cape May firemen report to your firehouse for a standby to cover the firehouse. Now, guess what? When they come in to cover the firehouse, guess who pays it for?
We do. Yeah, right. That's my point.
That's the thing, but that's easy, because you can put that in agreement. For every time we have to send our guys over there, you should pay this amount of
Well,
money.
take a look at these steps I put out here.
Dennis, I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I have a 6 o'clock appointment that I have.
Okay, we're done. We're done here, because all I want you to do is take this
And gentlemen, you're welcome.
and spitball. But,
I gave you my spitball.
number 3,
Let's get that parking going, buddy.
determine the cost of the service and how it's funded.
I agree with you.
This is,
Listen,
I think you're right.
I've been talking about this for years.
okay, well, there it is. Now,
Yeah.
can you handle that? You wanna be the honcho on that thing? You know what I'm talking about. I'm counting on you.
You need to just put. Take care. Okay, see you soon. I'll put me in touch with the right people.
Yeah, because, take a look at these things and
Go down these steps.
set up a little game plan for yourself. And then, because you know the people in the city government, you know how to handle this thing. You did a great job with the other thing, so I think this is perfect, all right? Against-